My mother marched into the marble lobby, pointing a finger at me as if she owned the skyscraper. She ordered security to escort me out, claiming I did not work here. It was hilarious because the guard had been on my payroll since the company started. He knew exactly who I was. 12 minutes later, after she saw one signature on a contract, her version of family collapsed right in front of my staff. My name is Caroline Hamilton, and on the Tuesday my past decided to break into my present. I looked like I had just lost a street fight with a photocopier. It was 10 in the morning in uptown Charlotte. The humidity was already climbing toward 90%, pressing against the glass facade of the building like a wet towel. I had spent the last 3 hours at a client site, a manufacturing plant in the industrial district that was struggling to pivot their supply chain, and I had absorbed the grime of the place by osmosis. My blazer, usually crisp, was draped over my arm. My white button-down shirt had a smudge of grease near the cuff. My hair was pulled back in a utilitarian knot that was slowly surrendering to gravity. I walked through the revolving doors of the Northline Strategy Group headquarters, my mind solely focused on caffeine. I needed an espresso, a shower, and 5 minutes of silence before I tackled the quarterly projections. The lobby was a cavern of cool air and polished marble. It was designed to intimidate competitors and reassure investors. The walls were clad in slate and steel. The lighting was recessed and expensive. It was the physical manifestation of everything I had built over the last 8 years. But the silence I craved was nowhere to be found. Instead, a shrill, demanding voice ricocheted off the stone walls. It was a sound I had not heard in nearly a decade, yet it triggered an immediate, visceral reaction in my nervous system. My stomach tightened. My pulse spiked. It was the sound of judgment. I stopped near the security turnstiles, squinting toward the reception desk. 2 women stood there. They were taking up space in a way that suggested they believed oxygen was a privilege reserved for them alone. The one on the left was younger, perhaps 34, dressed in a pastel sheath dress that looked perfect for a country club luncheon, but slightly out of place in a corporate tech corridor. That was my sister, Blair. She looked polished, but there was a brittleness to her posture, a tension in her neck that whispered of hidden fractures. The woman on the right was the source of the noise. Darlene Hamilton, my mother. She was wearing a structured suit that screamed old money, though I knew for a fact the fabric was likely hiding the fraying edges of their actual financial reality. Her hair was sprayed into a helmet of gold. She was leaning over the high desk, tapping a manicured fingernail on the granite surface. The young receptionist, a new hire named Jessica, who had only started 2 weeks ago, looked terrified. She was typing frantically, her eyes darting between the screen and the 2 women looming over her. "I demand to speak to the CEO immediately," Darlene said. Her voice carried the specific, nasal pitch of a woman who has never been told no without firing someone shortly after. "We are strategic partners from Raleigh. We do not need an appointment. Tell him the Hamiltons are here," Jessica stammered. "I am sorry, ma'am. I do not see a Mr. Hamilton on the executive registry, and our CEO is currently out of the building on a site visit," Darlene scoffed. She turned to Blair, rolling her eyes. "Incompetence? It is everywhere these days." I stood frozen for a beat. They were here, after 8 years of silence, after 8 years of zero contact. They were standing in the lobby of the company I built, demanding to see a phantom male CEO, because the idea that a woman, specifically this woman, could run this place was not even a variable in their equation. I took a breath. I shifted my blazer to my other arm and walked forward. I did not rush. I walked with the heavy, flat-footed exhaustion of someone who does the actual work. "Excuse me," I said, my voice low and raspy. "Is there a problem here?" Darlene whipped around. Her eyes swept over me, taking in the grease stain, the messy hair, the jeans that were definitely not designer. She did not see a daughter. She did not see a successful woman. She saw a disruption. She saw dirt. She sneered, her lip curling in a way that made me feel 12 years old again. "Yes, there is a problem," Darlene snapped. "We are trying to conduct high-level business, and the staff here is obstructing us. And who are you?" "The janitor. The courier." Blair looked at me. Her eyes narrowed. There was a flicker of recognition there, a ghost of a memory struggling to surface through layers of denial. She took a half step back, her hand clutching her designer bag tighter. "Mom," Blair whispered. "Wait." Darlene ignored her. She turned back to me, her patience evaporating. "Actually, do not answer that. I do not care who you are. You look like you slept in a dumpster. This is a place of business." I looked her dead in the eye. I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was the calm of the executioner who knows the verdict has already been signed. "I know exactly what kind of place this is," I said. Darlene's face turned a shade of crimson. She was not used to being spoken to with directness by anyone, let alone someone she considered beneath her station. She looked around, seeking an authority figure to validate her outrage. Her eyes landed on the security station. Reggie was standing there. Reggie was 6 feet 4 inches of former linebacker. He had been with me since I was renting a desk in a shared co-working space that smelled like stale beer and ambition. He knew my coffee order. He knew my schedule. He knew I hated interruptions on Tuesdays. Reggie was already moving toward us, his face set in a professional mask of warning. Darlene pointed a finger straight at my chest. It was a gesture of absolute command. "Security," she barked. "Escort this woman out. She does not work here." The words hung in the air. The few other employees in the lobby stopped mid-stride. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the sudden drop in atmospheric pressure. Reggie did not look at Darlene. He did not look at Blair. He walked straight past Darlene's outstretched finger. He moved between me and my mother, using his massive frame to create a physical barrier. He did not grab me. He did not ask me to leave. Instead, he nodded his head respectfully. "Good morning, Ms. Hamilton," Reggie said. His voice was a deep rumble that carried to every corner of the room. He paused, letting the name sink in. "Do you need me to remove these visitors, Ms. Hamilton? Or should I have Jessica call the police for trespassing?" The silence in the lobby went from heavy to absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble. Darlene's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her arm dropped to her side. She looked at Reggie, then at me, then back at Reggie. Her brain was trying to process a reality that violated the fundamental laws of her universe. Blair let out a small, strangled gasp. She knew. The puzzle pieces had clicked into place. Caroline Blair whispered. Darlene shook her head violently. "No, that is ridiculous. Look at her. She is a mess. This is some kind of joke. That girl is nobody." I stepped out from behind Reggie. I did not fix my hair. I did not smooth my shirt. I let her see the grease stain. I let her see the fatigue. I wanted her to see exactly what nobody looked like. I did not say a word. I simply turned my body slightly and pointed to the wall behind the reception desk. It was a massive installation, brushed steel lettering mounted on the slate. Northline Strategy Group, founder and CEO, Caroline Hamilton. I watched Darlene's eyes track the letters. I watched her read the name. I watched the blood drain from her face, leaving her pale and ghostly under the expensive makeup. She looked at the sign. Then she looked at me. The denial in her eyes fractured. The arrogance cracked. She took a step back, her heel catching on the edge of the rug. She stumbled, and her phone slipped from her hand, clattering loudly against the marble floor. The screen shattered, but she did not look down. She did not curse the broken phone. Her eyes changed. The disgust vanished, replaced instantly by a sharp, calculating gleam. I could practically hear the gears grinding in her head. She was doing the math. She was looking at the marble, the steel, the security guard, the terrified receptionist, and the sheer scale of the building. She was calculating net worth. She was calculating leverage. Her posture softened. She clasped her hands together, a sudden, grotesque parody of maternal warmth flooding her expression. "Caroline," she breathed out. "Oh, my goodness. We had no idea." She stepped toward me, ignoring the shattered phone. "Well, this is actually perfect," she said, her voice trembling with feigned emotion. "We were looking for a partner, and to find out it is family. It is destiny. The family business needs—" I raised my hand. "Palm out. Stop." The The motion was sharp enough that she flinched. I did not let her finish the sentence. I did not let her use the word family. She had lost the right to that vocabulary 8 years ago in Raleigh. I turned to Jessica, who was still staring at me with wide eyes. Jessica, set up the glass conference room, the soundproof one. 5 minutes. Then I turned back to the two women who shared my DNA but nothing else. My voice was devoid of anger. It was stripped of heat. It was cold. Hard steel. Pick up your phone. Darlene, and get inside. Darlene blinked, stunned by the use of her first name. But Caroline, honey, we can just... I cut her off again. No. I said, we are not doing honey. We are not doing destiny. I gestured toward the glass doors of the conference room, visible to everyone in the lobby. We are going to go into that room, and we are going to talk. But we are not talking as mother and daughter. That relationship ended the day you stole my future to pay for a party. I leaned in closer, dropping my voice so only they could hear the venom wrapped in the velvet. We talk as strangers, or security drags you out. Choose? Darlene looked at Reggie. Reggie crossed his arms, his biceps straining against his uniform shirt. He looked ready, perhaps even eager, to follow the previous order. Blair touched Darlene's arm. Mom, do what she says. Darlene swallowed hard. She bent down, her knees popping slightly, and retrieved her broken phone. She stood up, straightened her jacket, and tried to summon some shred of her former dignity. She marched toward the conference room, head held high, pretending she was still the queen of the chessboard. But I saw the tremor in her hands. I watched them walk into the fishbowl. I nodded to Reggie. Thank you. Reggie, keep the lobby clear. No interruptions. You got it. Ms. Hamilton, he said softly. I walked toward the conference room. I did not look back at the sign on the wall. I knew who I was, and in about 3 minutes, they were going to find out exactly who I had become, to understand why I stood in that conference room in Charlotte with ice in my veins. You have to understand the heat of Raleigh 8 years ago. It was late May, and the air was so thick with pollen and humidity that it felt like breathing through a wet wool blanket. I was 22 years old, fresh out of college, and naive enough to believe that a promise was a binding contract, especially when it came from the people who raised you. I remember the day clearly because it was the day I realized my family did not see me as a person. They saw me as a resource to be liquidated. I walked into the sunroom of our colonial-style house in North Raleigh. The room was usually my favorite place, filled with light and the smell of my mother's lemon trees, but that afternoon, it looked like a war room. Every surface was covered in swatches of silk, heavy cardstock invitations, and floral samples. It smelled of expensive perfume and frantic ambition. My mother, Darlene, was on the phone. Her voice pitched an octave higher than normal, which was her tell for when she was talking to someone richer than us. My sister, Blair, was sitting on the chaise lounge, looking critically at a piece of heavy cream stationery. Blair was 24 then, and she was the golden asset. She was engaged to Grant Holloway, in Raleigh. The Holloway name was currency. They owned commercial real estate, car dealerships, and half the city council. Marrying a Holloway was not just a wedding, it was a merger. It was the moment my parents had been engineering since Blair was old enough to hold a teacup. I stood in the doorway, clutching a plastic binder against my chest. Inside that binder was 6 months of work, market analysis, competitive landscapes, a breakdown of local small businesses that were failing simply because they did not understand digital retention. I had a name for it, the Hamilton Growth Initiative. It was clunky, but it was mine. I waited for Darlene to hang up. When she finally tossed her phone onto the glass coffee table, she let out a sigh that rattled her pearl necklace. The deposit is due by 5 o'clock, Darlene said, not looking at me. She was looking at Blair. If we lose the grand ballroom, the Holloways will think we are cutting corners. We cannot have Grant's mother thinking we are insolvent. Blair frowned. I need the peonies. Mom, if we have to switch to roses, I might as well just go to the courthouse. I stepped forward. The floorboards creaked, and they finally looked at me. Hey, I said, I hate to interrupt the royal decree, but I need 5 minutes. Darlene waved a hand at me. a gesture of dismissal she usually reserved for housekeepers. Not now. Caroline, we are in a crisis. The venue wants another $10,000 to secure the date because another couple is bidding on it. That is actually what I need to talk about, I said. Walking further into the room, I laid my binder on the only empty spot on the table. I have the incorporation papers ready. I just need the cashier's check from the trust. I am meeting the leasing agent for that small office above the bakery tomorrow. The room went quiet. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the silence of a bomb squad staring at a red wire. Blair looked at my binder, then up at me with a look of genuine confusion. The what, she asked? The trust. I repeated. Grandma's fund. My grandmother had left a specific sum of money when she passed. It was $50,000, not a fortune, but enough to start a life. The will had been simple. The money was to be released to us upon college graduation for the pursuit of higher education or a business venture. I had graduated 2 weeks ago. I had the venture. I had the plan. Darlene picked up her iced tea. She took a long, slow sip. She did not look at me. She looked out the window at the manicured lawn. Caroline, she said, her voice dropping to that reasonable, condescending tone that always made me feel like a toddler. We need to be realistic. I am being realistic, I said. I have clients lined up. I have a projection of breaking even in 6 months. Darlene set the glass down. That is not what I mean. I mean, we need to look at the bigger picture, the family picture. My father, Wade, walked in from the hallway then. He was wearing his golf attire, looking flushed and irritated. He saw the tension in the room and stopped. What is going on? He asked. Caroline is asking for the money, Darlene said. Wade looked at me. There was no warmth in his eyes. There never really was. But usually, there was at least a veneer of civility. Today, he looked tired of me. Now is not the time. Caroline, he said, it is exactly the time. I argued, feeling a cold prickle of dread start at the base of my spine. The will said graduation. I graduated. I have the business plan. I am legally entitled to that transfer. Wade laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. Entitled, he repeated. You keep using that word. You think because you printed out some charts, you are a CEO. I pointed at the binder. I'm not playing pretend. Dad, I have analyzed the local market. Small businesses in Raleigh are bleeding cash because they do not have streamlined operations. I can fix that. This is a real business, Blair scoffed. She reached out and flipped open the cover of my binder with 2 fingers, as if touching it might dirty her hands. It is marketing. Caroline, it is a little consulting gig. You can do that from your bedroom. You do not need an office. You do not need $50,000 to tell people to post on social media. It is not just social media, I snapped. It is operational strategy. Darlene stood up. She smoothed her skirt. Enough, she said. She walked over to me and placed a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy, like a shackle. Caroline, listen to me. We made a command decision. The wedding is not just a party. It is an investment in honor. It is an investment in this family's future. Grant's family, they operate at a different level. If we do not meet them there, we lose face. And if we lose face, Wade's business suffers. I froze. I looked at her hand, then at her face. What does that mean? I asked. What is a command decision? Darlene sighed, as if explaining gravity to a simpleton. We needed liquidity, the venue, the catering retainer, the public relations package to get the announcement in the regional magazine. It all added up. I felt the blood drain from my face. You spent it, I whispered. I did not spend it. She corrected me sharply. I reallocated it. You spent my money, I said, my voice rising. It is family money, Wade shouted. He stepped forward, his face reddening. It is all one pot. Caroline. You think you lived in this house for free for 22 years. You think your tuition paid itself, that money from your grandmother was part of this family's estate. And right now, the family's best bet is ensuring Blair's wedding goes off without a hitch. I looked at Blair. Surely, she would say something. Surely. She would understand that stealing my startup capital to buy flowers and champagne was insanity, but Blair just looked annoyed. "Don't be dramatic. Caroline," she said, examining her nails. "Mom said they would pay it back eventually. Once the wedding is over and Grant's connections start helping Dad's firm, there will be plenty of money. Just wait a year or two. Wait a year or two." I stared at her. "My business plan relies on the current market gap. In 2 years, the gap will be closed." Blair shrugged. "Then find a job. A real job. Stop trying to play boss." I turned back to Darlene. "I want to see the account," I said. Darlene crossed her arms. "No, I want to see the balance," I demanded. "There is no balance." Darlene exploded. "It is gone. Caroline." I transferred the last of it this morning to the florist and the event coordinator. It is zero. The word hung in the air. Zero. My knees felt weak. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself. $50,000. The safety net my grandmother had whispered to me about on her deathbed. She had told me, "This is so you never have to ask a man for permission to eat." And my mother had spent it on peonies. "You had no right," I said, my voice shaking. "That was theft." Wade slammed his hand on the table. "Watch your mouth. You are living under my roof, eating my food, and you dare accuse your mother of theft. We are doing this for all of us. When Blair marries Grant, we all rise." I looked at them. I really looked at them. I saw the desperation in Wade's eyes, the fear of a man whose own business was failing and who needed a rich son-in-law to bail him out. I saw the narcissism in Darlene's face, the woman who needed the society pages to validate her existence. And I saw the hollowness in Blair, who was willing to cannibalize her sister just to look perfect for a day. "You did not do this for us," I said quietly. "You did this for a show." Darlene stepped close to me. Her face was hard, the mask of the loving mother completely gone. "You are a dreamer. Caroline, you always have been. You are not cut out to run a company. You are soft. We did you a favor. If we gave you that money, you would have wasted it on rent and business cards and been broke in a year. At least this way, the money buys something real. Something real." I laughed, and it sounded dangerously close to a sob. "A party. A legacy," she hissed. Then she delivered the line that would echo in my head for the next 8 years. The line that severed the final chord. She looked me up and down with pure disdain. "If you cannot support the decisions of this family, then you do not deserve the protection of this family. If you want to be a separate entity, Caroline, then go ahead. But you do it on your own. No support, no safety net. You figure it out." She turned her back on me. "Now, get out of my sight. We have a seating chart to finalize." I stood there for a long moment. The room was bright with afternoon sun. But I felt cold. I looked at the binder on the table, the Hamilton Growth Initiative. I reached out and picked it up. I did not scream. I did not throw a vase. I simply realized that I was in a room with 3 strangers. "Okay," I said. I turned and walked out of the sunroom. I walked up the stairs to my childhood bedroom. I did not cry. The shock was too absolute for tears. I took a duffel bag from my closet. I did not pack everything. I did not want everything. I took 3 changes of clothes. I took my laptop. I took the hard drive with my business data. I took my toiletries. I looked at the photos on my dresser. Me and Blair at the beach. My graduation photo with my parents smiling fake smiles. I left them all there face down. I checked my bank account on my phone. I had $412 from my part-time tutoring gigs. That was it. I waited until nightfall. I could hear them downstairs, laughing over wine. The crisis apparently averted now that I had been put in my place. They were toasting to the wedding. I slipped out the back door. The night air was heavy and loud with cicadas. I walked to my car. A 10-year-old sedan that was technically in Wade's name, but I had paid for the repairs for the last 2 years. I hesitated. If I took the car, they would report it stolen. I knew they would. They were petty enough. I left the keys on the hood of the car. I adjusted the strap of my heavy duffel bag on my shoulder. I walked down the long driveway, past the manicured hedges, past the mailbox with the family name on it. I walked 3 miles to the nearest bus station. I sat on a plastic bench under a flickering halogen light, waiting for the Greyhound to Charlotte. I did not look back at the house. I did not send a text. I was 22. I had $400. I had no family. But as the bus pulled up, hissing air brakes into the silence of the night, I felt something else. I felt lighter. They had taken my money, but they had given me something much more dangerous. They had given me the freedom of having nothing left to lose. I stepped onto the bus, paid my fare, and took a seat by the window. As the engine roared to life, I opened my binder. I turned to the first page of my plan. I took a pen and crossed out the word Hamilton in the title. I stared at the blank space for a moment, then I closed the binder. I would figure out the name later. First, I had to survive. The first 3 months in Charlotte tasted like stale coffee and determination. I crashed on the couch of my college roommate, Sarah, in a 2-bedroom apartment that smelled perpetually of her cat's litter box and vanilla candles. Sarah was a saint. She did not ask for rent for the first month, and she pretended not to notice when I ate peanut butter out of the jar for dinner 3 nights in a row. My life became a binary existence divided into day and night, from 5:30 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. I was a waitress at a diner called The Skillet on the edge of the Dilworth neighborhood. I wore a polyester uniform that scratched my neck and comfortable shoes that were ugly as sin. I poured endless refills of decaf for retirees and memorized orders for truckers who tipped in crumpled ones. It was honest work. It was physically exhausting, which was a blessing. When your feet throb, you do not have the energy to think about your mother sipping iced tea in a sunroom paid for with your stolen future. Every Tuesday, I went to the bank. I deposited my tips. I kept exactly enough cash to buy gas for my car and food for the week. The rest went into a savings account I had opened the day I arrived. I did not name the account Emergency Fund. I did not name it House Fund. I logged into the banking app and renamed it the Proof Fund. It was not about proving anything to my parents. They were gone. They were in the rearview mirror. This was about proving it to myself. Every dollar in that account was a brick in a wall that would keep the world from ever making me feel small again. By 3 in the afternoon, I shed the waitress uniform, showered off the smell of bacon grease, and put on my one good blazer. I took my laptop to the public library because the Wi-Fi was free and the air conditioning was strong. I was hunting for clients. I scoured Craigslist and local business forums. I sent cold emails that were ignored. I walked into businesses and was politely asked to leave. It was humiliating. But humiliation is a luxury for people who have safety nets. I had hunger. My breakthrough did not happen in a boardroom. It happened in a waiting room that smelled of rubber and oil. I had taken my car to a place called Miller's Auto Repair because my check engine light was flickering. It was a family-owned shop, the kind with calendars of vintage cars on the wall and a vending machine that only dispensed soda. I sat in the plastic chair, listening to the owner, a gruff man named Frank Miller, argue on the phone. "I do not know why they are going to the guy down the street," Frank was saying, his voice rough with frustration. "We have been here for 30 years. Our mechanics are ASE certified. That place is a franchise. They overcharge." He slammed the phone down. I looked up from my laptop. "Is it the new collision center on South Boulevard?" I asked. Frank looked at me, surprised I had spoken. "Yeah. Flashy sign. Big grand opening. They are eating my lunch this quarter." I closed my laptop. I stood up and walked to the counter. "They are not eating your lunch because they are better mechanics," I said. "They are eating your lunch because when you search for Auto Repair Charlotte on a phone, they come up first. They have 300 reviews. You have 12, and their website lets people book appointments online. You are making people call you." Frank narrowed his eyes. "And who are you?" "A mechanic? No." I said, "I am a growth strategist." It was a title I had just invented, but it sounded right. I made him a deal. I told him I would work for him for 2 weeks. Free of charge, I would run his digital presence. If I did not bring in 5 new customers in 14 days, he did not owe me a dime, and I would pay for my own car repair. If I did, he would pay me a retainer of $500 a month and write me a testimonial. Frank looked at his silent phone. Then he looked at me. "You cannot make the phone ring with a computer," he grumbled. "Watch me." I said. For the next 2 weeks, I did not sleep. I lived on adrenaline. I did not just post pretty pictures on Facebook. I built a system. I went through his paper invoices from the last 2 years and created an email list. I sent out a campaign offering a 15% discount on brake inspections for returning customers. I set up a Google business profile and optimized it with keywords. I created a simple text message automation that asked happy customers to leave a review right after they paid. I treated Miller's Auto Repair like it was a Fortune 500 company. On day 10, Frank called me. "Turn it off," he said. What I asked. Panic flaring in my chest. Did I mess up? No. He laughed. A sound like gravel in a mixer. I have 3 guys out sick, and we are booked solid until next Tuesday. The phone will not stop ringing. When I walked into the shop to pick up my check, Frank did not just give me the $500. He gave me a check for $1,000. "You are worth double," he said. "And I told my cousin about you. He owns a landscaping business. He is having the same problem. Call him." That was the spark. The landscaping business led to a local bakery. The bakery led to a boutique law firm. I was making money, not a lot, but enough to move out of Sarah's place and into a studio apartment in a converted textile mill. It was 400 square feet. The view was a brick wall, but I had a key. It was mine, but I was still operating like a freelancer. I was trading time for money, and I was running out of time. That was when I met June Carver. I had signed up for a free business mentorship program at the community college. I expected to be paired with a retired accountant who would help me with taxes. Instead, I got June. June was 70 years old, 5 feet tall, and terrifying. She was the former chief operating officer of a logistics giant. She wore silk scarves and looked at you like she could see your credit score. We met at a coffee shop. I showed her my business plan. I proudly showed her my rates. I told her I was charging $40 an hour. June took off her reading glasses. She pushed my paper back across the table. "This is garbage," she said. I blinked. "Excuse me? You are charging secretary wages for executive strategy," she said. Her voice was crisp. "You are solving revenue problems. You are not typing memos. If you charge cheap prices, you get cheap clients. Cheap clients are a headache. They question every invoice. They call you at midnight." She took a sip of her black coffee. "Double your rate," June commanded. "Today. And stop billing by the hour. Bill by the value. If you make a company $50,000 in a month, why are you asking for $200? Ask for $5,000. "I cannot do that," I stammered. "I am 23. I am working out of a studio apartment." June leaned in. Her eyes were fierce. "Nobody knows you're in a studio apartment unless you tell them. Competence has no age. And value has no location. Stop negotiating like a beggar. Negotiate like a partner." I took her advice. I was terrified. But I did it. I pitched a comprehensive restructuring package to a dental practice the next week. I quoted them a price that made my stomach churn. $6,000 for a 3-month contract. They signed it without blinking. The money hit the proof fund. The balance crossed $10,000. I realized I could not do this alone anymore. I was spending 6 hours a day designing graphics and another 4 analyzing spreadsheets. I was the bottleneck in my own business. I needed a team. I did not have the budget for full-time employees. So I looked for the misfits. I looked for the people like me, talented, hungry, but perhaps overlooked by the traditional corporate machine. I found Marcus first. He was a 19-year-old college dropout who taught himself graphic design on YouTube. He had tattoos on his neck and a portfolio that was brilliant. No agency would touch him because he did not have a degree. I hired him on a project basis. Then came David. He was a quiet, awkward guy who loved numbers more than people. He could look at a spreadsheet of ad spend and tell you exactly where the waste was within 30 seconds. He was working at a grocery store stocking shelves because he bombed interviews. I hired him to run analytics. Finally, I found Elena. She was a single mom who could write copy that made you feel things. She could only work nights after her kid was asleep. I told her I did not care when she worked. As long as the work was done. We were a ragtag fleet. We met on video calls at odd hours. Marcus worked from his parents' basement. David worked from the back room of the grocery store on his breaks. I conducted strategy sessions from my 400-square-foot fortress, but we were sharp. We were faster than the big agencies because we did not have bureaucracy. We were hungrier. I decided then on the name. I needed something that sounded established, something that sounded like it had a foundation of stone, not a foundation of panic. Northline Strategy Group. It sounded directional, upward, forward, and for my own name, I stripped it down. I stopped using Caroline in my email signature. I stopped using it on contracts. I became C. Hamilton. C. Hamilton could be anyone. C. Hamilton could be a 60-year-old man. C. Hamilton could be a dynasty. It was a shield. It kept the personal out of the professional. I did not want clients to hire me because they liked my story. I did not want them to know about the girl who left home with a duffel bag. I wanted them to hire me because I made them money. One Friday evening in November, 6 months after I had stepped off that bus, I sat on the floor of my apartment. I had not bought furniture yet, other than a mattress and a desk. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the master spreadsheet. I looked at the revenue column. We had billed $18,000 that month. I looked at the expenses. I looked at the payouts for Marcus, David, and Elena. I looked at my rent. I looked at the taxes set aside. I looked at the bottom line. There was a surplus, a significant one. I transferred the profit into the proof fund. The number on the screen changed. It was a healthy 5-figure number. It was enough to survive a disaster. It was enough to walk away from a bad client. It was enough to say no. I sat back against the wall. The radiator hissed in the corner. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, a reminder of the city's chaos. But inside, it was quiet. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in half a year, my chest did not feel tight. The knot of anxiety that had lived in my solar plexus since that day in the sunroom loosened. I was not rich. I was not powerful. Not yet. But I was solvent. I closed the laptop. Okay. I whispered to the empty room. I stood up and walked to the window. Looking out at the lights of Charlotte. We can live. Northline Strategy Group did not stay small for long. By the time I turned 25, the company had mutated. We were no longer just a digital agency that fixed bad websites and ran Facebook ads. We had become something far more surgical. We were a growth architecture firm. I realized early on that most businesses did not fail because their product was bad. They failed because their internal organs were failing. They had no sales process. Their customer data was a mess of sticky notes and forgotten spreadsheets. They had no retention strategy. So, we stopped selling marketing. We started selling infrastructure. We walked into companies, ripped out their rotting systems, and installed high-speed, data-driven engines. We integrated customer relationship management software. We automated sales funnels. We trained their teams on how to close deals, not just how to talk about them. The shift changed everything. The invoices went from 4 figures to 5 figures, then 6. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday in Atlanta. I had been chasing a meeting with Apex Health Solutions for 3 months. They were a chain of urgent care clinics that had expanded too fast and were bleeding cash. Their operations were a disaster. Patients were waiting 3 hours to be seen. Billing was months behind. They were losing 30% of their revenue to administrative incompetence. I walked into their boardroom wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. I sat down across from their board of directors, 6 men in their 60s, who looked at me like I was the intern bringing the coffee. The chairman, a man named Mr. Sterling, looked at his watch. You have 20 minutes. Ms. Hamilton, make it quick. I did not open a PowerPoint presentation. I did not hand out brochures. I placed a single sheet of paper in front of him. I have analyzed your patient intake data from the public access records and cross-referenced it with your competitors' wait times. I said, keeping my voice level. You are losing 4,000 patients a month. At an average billing of $150 per visit, you are lighting $600,000 on fire every 30 days. The room went silent. Mr. Sterling picked up the paper. I continued. Your problem is not that people do not get sick. Your problem is that your digital booking system crashes on mobile devices, and your follow-up emails are going to spam. I can fix the tech in 2 weeks. I can retrain your intake staff in 4, and I can recover 20% of that lost revenue by next quarter. Mr. Sterling looked at me over his glasses. And what is your fee? I did not blink. $150,000 for the setup, plus 5% of all recovered revenue for the first year. One of the other board members scoffed. That is robbery. I looked at him. You are losing $600,000 a month. I am offering to stop the bleeding for a fraction of the cost. You can call it robbery, or you can call it a tourniquet. It is your choice. They signed the contract 45 minutes later. That drive back to Charlotte was the first time I allowed myself to listen to music in the car. I played it loud. I rolled the windows down. The wind whipped through the interior, smelling of rain and asphalt and victory. With the Atlanta capital, Northline exploded. I leased a real office. We moved out of the co-working space and into a sleek, mid-rise building in the Uptown district. It was not the marble-clad skyscraper we would eventually occupy, but it was legitimate. It had glass walls. It had a conference room. It had a break room with a coffee machine that did not require quarters. I started hiring aggressively, but I did not hire the way my father hired. I did not look for Ivy League degrees or country club memberships. I did not care who their parents were. I hired the hungry. I hired a project manager who had been fired from a bank for having visible tattoos, but who could organize a workflow better than a computer. I hired a sales director who was a former high school teacher and knew how to explain complex ideas to stubborn people. My interview process was simple. I gave them a problem, a real, messy business problem, and gave them 1 hour to solve it. I did not care about the answer as much as I cared about how they got there. Did they panic? Did they ask questions? Did they think I told them on day 1? We do not care where you came from. We care where you are taking this company. If you are good, you stay. If you are kind, you rise. If you play office politics, you are out. We became a fortress of competence, but as the company profile grew, so did my paranoia. I was sitting in my new office late one night, reviewing the analytics for our own website, when a red flag popped up on my dashboard. My security software, which I had David configured to be hypersensitive, alerted me to a pattern of unusual traffic. Someone was searching for me, not searching for Northline Strategy Group, searching for Caroline Hamilton. The IP address was located in Raleigh, North Carolina. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. It was not a casual search. This person had dug into the state incorporation records. They had tried to access my LinkedIn profile, which I kept locked down tight. They had even tried to find my home address through public tax records. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was it them? Was it Darlene Wade? I clicked on the details. The search pattern was clumsy. It was persistent but amateur. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, a sharp-edged woman named Veronica struggling to make partner at a big city firm. Veronica, I said, I need you to double-check the suppression order on my personal data. Someone is digging. Caroline, it is 3 a.m. Veronica groaned. I know. Check it anyway. I want my home address buried so deep you need a submarine to find it. I want my personal cell number scrubbed from every data broker in the state. They are looking for me. Veronica, who is my past? I said. I did not explain further. I did not have to. I paid Veronica to build walls, not to ask why I needed them. I spent the next week looking over my shoulder. Every time a car with a Raleigh license plate drove past, I tensed, but nobody came. The searches stopped as abruptly as they had begun. I realized they had hit the wall I built. They could find the company, but they could not find the woman behind it. To the outside world. See? Hamilton was a ghost in a suit. That was when I met Reggie. We were moving the final boxes into the new office. It was a Saturday. I was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, carrying a crate of heavy reference books. I refused to let the movers handle my personal library. I was struggling to get the crate through the revolving doors of the lobby. A massive hand reached out and steadied the box. I looked up. The security guard was a giant of a man, with broad shoulders and a face that looked like it had seen everything and decided to be kind anyway. I got that for you. Ma'am, he said. No, I am okay. I insisted, shifting the weight. I can manage. He did not let go. He just smiled. I know you can manage. I have seen you hauling boxes in and out of here for 3 hours. But you are the boss, right? Even the boss gets to have a door held open sometimes. I paused. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. Okay, I said. Thank you. He took the box as if it weighed nothing. He walked me to the elevator. I am Reggie, he said. I am Caroline. I replied. I know, he said. I saw the name on the directory. North Line. Sounds fancy. It is getting there, I said. Reggie hit the button for the 12th floor. Well, Ms. Hamilton, you let me know if anyone gives you trouble. I am usually at the front desk from 6 to 6. I keep the riffraff out. I looked at him. I saw a sincerity there that was rare. Thank you, Reggie. I said, I might hold you to that. We had no idea then how literal that promise would become. As North Lane stabilized, I began to play the game at a higher level. I hired a forensic accountant to audit our books every quarter, not because I didn't trust my team, but because I wanted our financial hygiene to be spotless. I wanted to be audit-proof. I retained a top-tier firm for data security. We encrypted everything: client data, internal communications, my personal schedule. It was all locked behind two-factor authentication and biometric scans. I was building a kingdom, but I was building it like a bunker. Then came the interview request. It was from a regional business magazine. A journalist named Keller. He sent an email to my public relations manager, a bright kid named Leo, asking for a profile piece on the mystery woman of Charlotte Tech. Leo came into my office, beaming. This is it, Boss Leo said, waving the iPad. A 4-page spread. They want to know your story. They want to know where you came from. The rags to riches angle. People love that stuff. I froze. I looked at the email. The journalist was asking specific questions. Where did she go to college? Who are her parents? Is she related to the Raleigh Hamiltons? The questions were probes. They were looking for the drama. They wanted the gossip. Tell him no. I said. Leo's smile dropped. What, Caroline? This is huge exposure. This is free marketing. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the city skyline. I do not sell my biography. Leo. I sell results. I am not a character in a soap opera. I am a CEO. But no. I cut him off. Tell him I am unavailable. Tell him we can talk about our conversion rates for the Atlanta clinic. We can talk about the new predictive AI model David is building, but we do not talk about me. My personal life is a black box. Keep it that way. Leo looked disappointed, but he nodded. He sent the rejection. I knew what I was doing. I was starving the fire. If I gave an interview, if I mentioned my parents, it would be a beacon. It would signal to Darlene and Wade that I was ripe for harvest. They would see my success, and they would come for their share. I was not ready for them yet. I needed to be stronger. The fiscal year ended with a bang. We signed a strategic partnership with a hospital network that covered 3 states. The contract was worth $4.5 million over 2 years. It was the kind of deal that people retire on. I signed the papers in my office, alone. It was late. The cleaning crew was vacuuming the hallway. I put the pen down. I looked at the signature. C. Hamilton. I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out a small whiteboard marker. I had a whiteboard on the back of my door. It had a list of goals I had written 3 years ago. 1. Survive. 2. Hire a team. 3. Hit 1 million in revenue. 4. Make yourself untouchable. I stood up. I walked to the door. I drew a thick black line through number 4. I looked at it for a long time. $4.5 million, a dedicated legal team, a fortress of an office, a security guard who had my back. I was not just the girl who ran away with a duffel bag anymore. I was an institution. I capped the marker. Let them come. I whispered to the empty room. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that they would. Desperation has a way of sniffing out success. Darlene and Wade were sharks, and sharks always find the blood in the water. But they did not know that this time, the water was full of mines. I turned off the lights and walked out past the empty cubicles, past the silent reception desk, and nodded to the night guard who had taken over for Reggie. I walked out into the cool Charlotte night, got into my car, a German sedan I had bought with cash, and drove home. I slept soundly for the first time in years. I was ready. Disaster does not always strike like lightning. Sometimes, it arrives like a slow leak in the ceiling. You ignore the damp spot for months, painting over it, pretending the structure is sound, until one day the entire roof caves in on top of your dinner table. For the House of Hamilton. The rain had been falling for a long time. I just happened to be the one holding the bucket when the ceiling finally gave way. The rumors started reaching me in fragments, whispered over Cobb salads at business luncheons, or forwarded in industry newsletters that tracked the decline of legacy media. I was sitting in a bistro in uptown Charlotte with a commercial real estate broker named Elias, reviewing potential locations for a second Northline satellite office. Elias was a man who knew the credit score of every building in North Carolina. He tapped his fork against his plate, looking thoughtful. "You are from Raleigh originally, right, Caroline?" he asked. I took a sip of sparkling water. "I live there. I am from here now." Why Elias lowered his voice, a habit of people about to trade high-value gossip. I heard some interesting chatter about the Hamilton and Pierce Media building on Fayetteville Street. They are trying to sublease 3 floors. Word is, they are defaulting on the maintenance fees. It is a shame. That agency used to be the gold standard in the 90s. I kept my face perfectly neutral. I cut a piece of chicken with surgical precision. Markets change. Elias, some people adapt. Some people keep buying fax machines. Elias laughed. "You are cold, Hamilton." "But you are right. They refuse to pivot to digital. I heard Wade Hamilton fired his last CTO for suggesting they move their ad buying to programmatic. The man thinks the internet is a fad that will blow over." I did not laugh. I knew that was not a joke. It was a memory. I could hear my father's voice from 8 years ago, echoing in the sunroom con. "You only wonder about dreams. Real business is shaking hands." But the rot went deeper than my father's refusal to learn what an algorithm was. It extended to the investment that had cost me my startup capital. Blair and Grant, the merger of the century, the wedding that was supposed to secure the family dynasty. Information in the South travels faster than fiber optics, especially when it involves the fall of a golden couple. I did not seek it out, but it found me. I learned through a mutual acquaintance, a vendor who had done the lighting for their anniversary party, that the Holloway fortune was not as liquid as everyone pretended. Grant Holloway liked the lifestyle of a millionaire, but he had the work ethic of a sloth. He had leveraged his family's real estate holdings to fund a series of vanity projects, a craft brewery that never opened, a racehorse that never won, and a tech startup that produced nothing but lawsuits. Blair was not living the dream. She was managing a crisis. She was the one smiling at charity galas while her credit cards were being declined at the grocery store. I did not feel happy when I heard this. Revenge is a hot emotion. It burns. What I felt was cold. It was the detached satisfaction of a physicist watching an apple fall. Gravity works. If you build a foundation on theft and pretension, the structure will eventually slide into the mud. Then came the email. It arrived on a Thursday afternoon, buried in the general inquiry inbox that my assistant, Leo, usually filtered, but he had flagged this one and forwarded it to me with a note. "This looks weirdly high level, but also kind of desperate. Do you want to see it?" I opened the message. Subject: Strategic Partnership Opportunity. Executive Meeting Request from Hamilton Capital. Advisory to CEO. Northline Strategy Group. I stared at the sender name, Hamilton Capital Advisory. It was a shell. I knew it instantly. My father's company was Hamilton and Pierce Media. This new entity was something they had likely incorporated last week to sound like an investment firm. It smelled of Darlene. It had her fingerprints all over the branding, vague, grandiose, and meaningless. I read the body of the email. Dear CEO, we represent a legacy firm with over 40 years of dominance in the North Carolina media landscape. We have identified Northline Strategy Group as a potential beneficiary of our deep network and institutional wisdom. We are looking to acquire a digital arm to complement our robust traditional portfolio. We request an audience with C. Hamilton, to discuss a synergy that could redefine the market. Sincerely, the partners. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. The audacity was breathtaking. They were not looking to acquire me. They did not have the money to acquire a used car, let alone Northline. They were looking for a lifeboat. They wanted to merge with a digital agency to save their dying print business, and they had likely blasted this email to every firm in the Southeast. They had no idea who C. Hamilton was. To them, I was just a target, a faceless executive running a profitable shop in Charlotte. They were so blinded by their own ego that they had not even done the basic due diligence to check the incorporation papers. Or perhaps I had hidden my tracks so well that they simply couldn't find the connection. I looked at the screen. I could delete it. I could block the domain. I could send a reply saying, "Go to hell, Mom." But I was a strategist, and a strategist waits for the opponent to walk fully into the trap. I hit reply. I did not sign it with my full name. I kept the mystique. To Hamilton Capital Advisory, we are open to a preliminary conversation regarding market alignment. Our CEO, C. Hamilton, has a brief window next Tuesday at 10 in the morning. Please present yourselves at the lobby of the Northline Tower. Standard visitor protocols apply. Regards, Executive Office, Northline Strategy Group. I sent it. Then I picked up the internal line and called the front desk. "Jessica," I said. "Yes, Ms. Hamilton." "Next Tuesday at 10, we have a delegation coming from Raleigh. 2 women, maybe a man. Name is Hamilton." "Understood," Jessica said, her voice bright. "Should I prep the executive boardroom? Do you want the catering spread?" I said. My voice was flat. "Do not book a room. Do not offer them coffee. When they arrive, treat them like cold call vendors. Make them wait in the lobby. Ask for ID. If they make a scene, call security." Jessica paused. I could hear the confusion on the line. "Okay, is everything all right?" "Ms. Hamilton, everything is fine." "Jessica, just follow the protocol." I hung up. I needed to be sure. I needed to know exactly how much blood was in the water before the sharks arrived. I called Veronica, my lawyer. "Veronica, I need you to run a deep liquidity check on Hamilton and Pierce Media, and check the personal liabilities of Wade Hamilton and Darlene Hamilton. Give me 2 hours," Veronica said. She called back in 90 minutes. "Caroline, are you sitting down?" "I am standing," I said, looking out the window at the sprawling city below. "They are not just in trouble. Caroline, they are terminal." Veronica's voice was crisp, reading from a digital report. "Hamilton and Pierce has a balloon loan with First Citizens Bank that matures in 21 days. The principal is $2 million. They do not have it." I closed my eyes. $2 million. There is more. Veronica continued. "They have leveraged their personal home against the business line of credit. If the business defaults, they lose the house in Raleigh. They lose the cars. They lose everything. And here's the kicker, Grant Holloway. Your brother-in-law. He is listed as a guarantor on a secondary high-interest loan they took out 6 months ago to make payroll." I let out a low breath. "So, if the business goes down, it takes both families with it." "Exactly," Veronica said. "They are radioactive. Caroline, do not touch this with a 10-foot pole. If you merge with them, you inherit their debt. They are looking for a sucker to bail them out. I am not a sucker." "Veronica, I know you are not. But why are you meeting them?" "Because," I said, watching a storm cloud roll over the horizon, "I want to see their faces when they realize the bank they are trying to rob belongs to the teller they fired." I hung up the phone. The puzzle was complete. The strategic partnership was a lie. It was a desperate, flailing attempt to find a cash infusion before the bank seized the keys to the kingdom. They were coming to Charlotte not to negotiate, but to beg in disguise. I looked at my calendar. Tuesday, 10:00 a.m. Hamilton delegation. I tapped the screen with my fingernail. It made a sharp, rhythmic sound against the glass. 8 years. 8 years of building. 8 years of eating peanut butter. 8 years of proving I was more than a dreamer. 8 years of silence. And now, they were coming to me. Not because they missed me, not because they loved me, but because they needed to consume something to survive, and they thought I looked like a meal. I walked over to the mirror in the corner of my office. I adjusted my blazer. I looked at the woman in the reflection. She looked tired. Yes, but she looked dangerous. They were expecting C. Hamilton, the generic corporate suit. They were expecting a checkbook. They were going to get Caroline. Let them come. I whispered to the empty office. The storm was finally here, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who was going to get wet. Tuesday morning arrived with the heaviness of a judgment day that had been postponed for too long. I stood in my walk-in closet at 6 a.m, staring at the rows of tailored suits. I had Armani, Hugo Boss, and custom pieces commissioned from a tailor in London. These were the uniforms of C. Hamilton, the CEO who could walk into a boardroom and silence a table of men with a single glance. They were armor. They were impeccably pressed, sharp-edged, and screamed success. I reached out and pushed the hangers aside. Today, I did not want to be C. Hamilton the institution. Today, I needed to be a mirror. I knew my mother. I knew Darlene Hamilton better than I knew the back of my own hand. I knew that her judgment was based entirely on surface area. If I wore a $2,000 suit, she would see a peer, or at least a threat worthy of respect. She would be on her guard. She would be charming, manipulative, and careful. I did not want her careful. I wanted her raw. I wanted her unfiltered. I reached into the back of the closet and pulled out a pair of faded denim jeans. They were clean, but the hem was frayed. I grabbed a simple white cotton t-shirt and a thin, unstructured navy blazer that I usually wore on weekends to the grocery store. I pulled my hair back into a loose, slightly messy ponytail. I skipped the heavy makeup, applying only a touch of moisturizer. I looked in the mirror. I did not look like the founder of a multi-million-dollar strategy firm. I looked like an intern. I looked like the girl who ran errands. I looked like the Caroline she remembered the disappointment. Perfect, I whispered. I drove to the office early. I spent the morning in my office, reviewing the Hamilton and Pierce credit reports one last time. The numbers were catastrophic. They were not just drowning. They were already at the bottom of the ocean. Arguing with the water, at 9:45, I went down to the lobby. Northline Strategy Group occupied the top 4 floors of the building, but our main reception was on the ground floor, a massive expanse of polished stone and glass that we shared with a law firm. I positioned myself near the elevator banks, holding a tablet, pretending to review documents. I stood off to the side, near a large potted ficus, visible but unassuming. I wanted to watch them enter. I wanted to see them before they put on their masks. At 9:58, the revolving doors spun. Darlene entered first. She walked as if she were inspecting troops. She was wearing a cream-colored suit that I recognized from a collection 3 seasons ago, still expensive. But Darlene would have died rather than be seen in something that wasn't current, which told me the money really was tight. She carried a Birkin bag that she held like a shield. Blair followed a step behind. My sister looked thinner than I remembered. Her face was contoured to perfection, but there were lines of tension around her mouth that makeup could not hide. She looked exhausted, her eyes darting around the lobby with a mix of anxiety and defensiveness. They did not look at the architecture. They did not look at the art on the walls. They marched straight to the reception desk. I watched Darlene approach Jessica, our receptionist. Jessica was 22, bright, and incredibly efficient, but she had a soft voice. I saw Darlene slam her hand down on the marble counter. I could not hear the words from where I stood, but I saw the body language, the tilt of the chin, the aggressive lean. Darlene was demanding. She was establishing dominance immediately because she felt small, and small people take up the most space. I moved closer. Silent in my rubber-soled loafers. I need you to call him down now. I heard Darlene's voice cut through the hum of the lobby. We do not have time to sit on your sofas. We are the Hamiltons. We are here for the strategic partnership meeting. Jessica typed something on her keyboard, her face flushing pink. I am sorry. Mrs. Hamilton, Jessica said, her voice trembling slightly but holding firm. I have notified the executive suite. but standard protocol requires all visitors to sign in and wait for an escort. The elevators are keycard access only. Darlene let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. She turned to Blair. Do you hear this? She is treating us like couriers. Blair looked uncomfortable. She shifted her weight, glancing around the lobby. She looked at the security desk where Reggie was monitoring the monitors. Then her eyes swept past the elevators. Her gaze landed on me. I was standing 10 feet away, holding my tablet, looking at them. Blair froze. Her eyes widened. She squinted, as if trying to focus a camera lens. For a second, I saw the sister I used to play in the sand with. I saw the recognition spark in her brain. She took a half step toward me, her mouth opening slightly. Mom, Blair whispered, tugging on Darlene's sleeve. Mom, look. Darlene whipped her head around, annoyed at the interruption. What is it over there? Blair said, pointing discreetly at me. That girl. Doesn't she look like Caroline? Darlene glanced at me. Her eyes swept over my jeans. They lingered on the fray at the hem. They noted the lack of jewelry. They assessed the simple t-shirt. She made a noise of pure disgust. Don't be ridiculous. Blair, Darlene snapped. Loud enough for me to hear. Look at her. That is a cleaner or an intern. Caroline is probably working at a diner somewhere if she is not in jail for vagrancy. Stop staring at the help. It is rude. She turned her back on me. I felt a smile tug at the corner of my mouth. It was a cold, sharp thing. She had looked right at me and seen nothing but her own prejudice. She could not conceive of a universe where her cast-off daughter was standing in a position of power. Her worldview required me to be a failure to validate her cruelty. I waited another beat. I watched Darlene turn back to Jessica. Listen to me, little girl. Darlene hissed. I am going to count to 3. If I do not have a pass in my hand, I am going to call your supervisor and have you fired for incompetence. Do you understand who we are? We are the Hamiltons. That was the cue. I stepped forward. I did not walk with the heavy stomp of an angry employee. I walked with the fluid, silent grace of a predator entering a clearing. Excuse me, I said. My voice was low, raspy, and calm. Darlene spun around. She looked at me with the fury of a woman interrupted during a tirade. What she barked. I stood 3 feet from her. I looked her in the eye. I did not blink. Is there a problem here? I asked. You are disturbing the lobby. Darlene's face turned a shade of violet. The audacity of this nobody, this underdressed girl questioning her, was too much. The problem, Darlene spat, pointing a manicured finger at my chest, is that this building is staffed by idiots, and now I have the janitorial staff asking me questions. She looked me up and down again, her lip curling. Do you know how much this suit cost? It cost more than your entire education. Now back off. Blair was staring at me. She was shaking her head slightly. She knew. She could see the structure of my face. The eyes that were the same shape as our father's. Mom, Blair said, her voice rising in panic. Mom, stop. That is her. That is Caroline. Darlene ignored her. She was on a roll. She was high on her own rage. She looked past me, scanning the room for authority. She saw Reggie standing by the turnstiles. Reggie, who was 6'4" and built like a tank. She waved her arm at him. Security, she screamed. The entire lobby went silent. People stopped walking. A courier dropped a package. Every eye turned to us. Darlene pointed at me. Her finger was shaking with righteousness. Officer, escort this woman out. She doesn't work here. She is harassing us. I stood perfectly still. I did not look at Reggie. I kept my eyes locked on Darlene. I wanted to memorize this moment. I wanted to etch the look of arrogant certainty on her face into my memory forever. Reggie began to walk toward us. His boots made heavy, rhythmic thuds on the marble floor. Darlene smirked. She crossed her arms, satisfied. She thought she had won. She thought the world still worked the way it did in her country club in Raleigh. Reggie stopped. He was standing directly between me and Darlene. He towered over her. Darlene looked up at him, expecting him to grab my arm. Remove her, Darlene commanded. Reggie did not move. He looked down at Darlene with a flat, unimpressed expression. Then he turned his back to her. He faced me. He adjusted his uniform tie. He stood up straighter. "Good morning, Ms. Hamilton," Reggie said. His voice was deep and respectful. Carrying to the back of the room, he paused, letting the name hang in the air like a guillotine blade. "I apologize for the disturbance. Ms. Hamilton, would you like me to remove these visitors from the premises, or should I call the police for disorderly conduct?" The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a lung. I saw Darlene's face crumble. It was not a gradual change. It was an instant collapse. Her jaw went slack. Her eyes bulged. The smirk dissolved into a mask of absolute, terrifying confusion. She looked at Reggie. She looked at me. She looked at the name on the wall behind the reception desk, Northline Strategy Group. Then she looked back at me. The math finally hit her. The name C, Hamilton, the CEO, the girl in the jeans, it all crashed together. Blair let out a small, whimpering sound and covered her mouth with her hand. Darlene stammered. Her voice was a dry croak. You are the—" I did not shout. I did not scream. I did not unleash 8 years of anger. That would have given her too much power. That would have shown her she still affected me. Instead, I gave her nothing but professional indifference. I looked at Reggie. "Thank you, Reggie. That won't be necessary." I turned my gaze back to Darlene. She looked smaller now. The suit looked like a costume. The bag looked heavy. I leaned in slightly, invading her personal space just enough to make her flinch. "If you want to do business, Darlene, you will lower your voice." I gestured toward the glass-walled conference room adjacent to the lobby. "Get in the conference room. I do not want you making noise in the lobby of my company. My employees are trying to work." I turned on my heel and walked toward the glass doors. I did not wait to see if they followed. I knew they would. Desperation has no pride, and they were very, very desperate. As I walked away, I heard the click of their heels hurrying after me. They sounded frantic. They sounded like people running to catch a train that had already left the station. I pushed open the door to the conference room and held it open. Darlene walked in first. She would not meet my eyes. She looked at the floor, then at the sleek, modern table, then at the view of the city. She looked like a ghost haunting a house she didn't own. Blair followed, her face pale. As she passed me, she whispered one word, "Caroline." I did not answer. I let the door click shut behind them, sealing us in the soundproof glass box. The lobby outside went back to its rhythm. Phones rang, people typed, the world kept turning. But inside the room, time had stopped. I walked to the head of the table. I did not sit down. I placed my hands on the back of the leather executive chair, my chair. I looked at the two women who had thrown me away like garbage. Darlene was clutching her bag, trying to reassemble her dignity. She cleared her throat. She put on a shaky, terrified smile. "Caroline, honey," she began, her voice quivering. "My God, look at you. We had no idea. If we had known," I held up a hand. The gesture was sharp, like a knife hand strike. "Stop," I said. The words snapped in the air. "Do not call me honey. Do not talk about family. Do not pretend this is a reunion." I pulled out the chair and sat down. I rested my elbows on the table and tented my fingers. "You are here because you sent an email to C. Hamilton asking for a lifeline. I am C. Hamilton." I looked at Darlene's terrified eyes. "So, let's talk business. And let's talk like strangers. Because if you try to be my mother for even 1 second, security is coming back." Darlene swallowed hard. She nodded. A jerky, mechanical motion. I had the stage. I had the power. And I was about to dissect them piece by piece. The silence inside the conference room was a physical weight. It pressed against the glass walls, separating the three of us from the bustling, productive world of my employees outside. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady note, but the tension in the room was vibrating at a frequency that could shatter teeth. Darlene sat across from me. She had smoothed her skirt and placed her hands on the table, clasping them together in a white-knuckled grip. She looked around the room, taking in the panoramic view of the Charlotte skyline, the imported Italian leather chairs, and the smart glass technology that had frosted the walls for privacy the moment the door clicked shut. She forced a smile. It was a grotesque thing, tight and trembling, stretching skin that had seen too many chemical peels. "Caroline," she began, her voice pitching up into that saccharine tone she used for charity galas. "I have to say, this is overwhelming. When we heard you were in Charlotte, we had no idea. I mean, look at this. You have done so well for yourself." She reached out a hand as if to touch mine across the mahogany table. I did not move mine. I let her hand hover in the dead air until she awkwardly retracted it. "We have missed you," she continued, undeterred by the chill. "We really have. Family as well. Family is everything. And to see you here, running all of this, it makes a mother proud." I leaned back in my chair. I looked at her with the clinical detachment of a biologist examining a specimen under a microscope. "Stop," I said. The word was quiet, but it hit the table like a gavel. Darlene blinked. "I'm just saying, you are wasting time." "Darlene," I interrupted, "and my time costs $4,000 an hour." I glanced at the expensive watch on my wrist, then back at her. "You did not come here because you missed me. You did not come here because you are proud. You did not even know who I was until 10 minutes ago." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You are here because you need something. So let us skip the Hallmark card segment of the meeting. Did you come here for the daughter you threw out? Or did you come here for the checkbook you think I'm holding, Blair?" Let out a sharp intake of breath. She was sitting next to our mother, looking like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and glued back together wrong. She was staring at me, her eyes wide and watery. I could see the realization dawning on her. She was looking at my suit, no, my jeans, and then at the office, and realizing that while she had spent the last 8 years pretending to be rich, I had spent them actually becoming wealthy. Darlene's smile vanished. The mask dropped, revealing the hard, calculating woman beneath. She straightened her spine. "Fine," she said, her voice turning brittle. "You want to play the cold executive? We can play that way." She reached into her oversized designer bag and pulled out a thin leather folio. She did not open it immediately. "We are here representing Hamilton and Pierce Media," she said, adopting a formal business tone that sounded ridiculous coming from her. "As you know, we are a legacy institution." "I know." I said, "I know you are bleeding cash." Darlene flinched. "We are in a transitional period," she corrected sharply. "The market has been volatile. We are looking for a strategic partner to help us modernize our digital infrastructure. We thought since you are in that line of work, it would be a mutually beneficial arrangement, a merger of sorts." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "A merger?" I asked. "Darlene, a merger implies you have assets. You do not have assets. You have liabilities." I picked up the remote for the presentation screen on the wall. I clicked a button. The screen flared to life, displaying a series of graphs and charts I had compiled that morning. The lines on the charts were all red, and they were all pointing down. I stood up and walked to the screen. "I had my team run a preliminary analysis on your firm based on public filings and vendor credit reports," I said, pointing to the first graph. "Your client retention rate has dropped 40% in 2 years. You have lost your 3 biggest accounts: the car dealership network, the regional grocery chain, and the furniture outlet." I clicked to the next slide. "Your revenue is down 60%. Your operating costs have actually gone up because you are still paying for a downtown Raleigh office you do not need, and a bloated middle management team that does nothing." I turned to face them, and according to the credit bureaus, you are 21 days away from defaulting on a $2 million balloon payment to First Citizens Bank. The room went dead silent. Darlene's face had gone the color of old ash. She stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing. She had thought she could come here and spin a story about expansion and synergy. She had not realized that in my world, there are no secrets, only data. Blair looked at the screen, then at her mother. "Mom," Blair whispered, "is that true?" 2 million. Darlene snapped at her. "Be quiet." "Blair?" She turned her glare on me. You have no right to spy on our business. Caroline, it is not spying. I said, it is due diligence. You emailed me. Remember, you asked for a meeting with C. Hamilton? Well, C. Hamilton does her homework. I walked back to the table and sat down. The problem with your company is not the market. Darlene, it is not the economy. It is you. It is your arrogance. You refuse to adapt. You thought the Hamilton name was enough to keep clients paying for obsolete print ads. You were wrong, and now you are drowning. Darlene's hands were shaking. She gripped the edge of the table. We built that company, she hissed. Your father and I built it from nothing, and now you have returned it to nothing. I countered. Darlene stared at me with pure venom. Then, she took a breath. She looked toward the door, then back at me. Actually, she said, her voice changing again. It became sly, dangerous. It is interesting you talk about building things from nothing. She gestured to the man who had entered the room with them, a man I had barely acknowledged until now. He had been lurking in the corner, quiet and gray. He was their legal advisor, a man named Mr. Vance. I knew him. He was a golfing buddy of my father's, who had barely passed the bar exam in the 80s. Mr. Vance stepped forward. He placed a briefcase on the table. Ms. Hamilton, Mr. Vance said, his voice oily. While your success is impressive, we do have to address the matter of seed capital. I raised an eyebrow. Excuse me, Mr. Vance smiled, showing yellowed teeth. Well, it is the position of the Hamilton family that Northline Strategy Group was founded using resources that originated from the family estate. Specifically, the educational and support funds provided to you during your upbringing, and the intellectual property developed while you were living under the Hamilton roof. I stared at him. I genuinely could not believe the audacity. Are you serious? I asked. Darlene leaned forward, looking triumphant. We invested in you for 22 years. Caroline, we fed you, we clothed you, we paid for your degree, and when you left well, you took family resources. If you used family money to start this company, then legally, the family is entitled to an equity stake. She smirked. We are not asking for much, just a controlling interest, 51%. We can structure it as a parent company acquisition. Hamilton and Pierce absorbs Northline. You keep your title. Of course, but we handle the finances. I looked at Blair. She looked horrified. She was shaking her head. Mom, you cannot do that, Blair whispered. She left with a duffel bag. Shut up, Blair, Darlene said without looking at her. I looked at Darlene. I looked at Vance. So that is the play, I said softly. You did not come to beg. You came to steal. Again, I am not stealing, Darlene said. I am claiming what is owed. You are my daughter. Your success belongs to the family. I closed my eyes for a second. I took a deep breath. I thought about the nights I slept on the floor. I thought about the peanut butter. I thought about the proof fund. Then I opened my eyes. I opened the folder I had brought with me. It contained a single, crisp document. Mr. Vance, I said, my voice calm. I assume you are familiar with the concept of forensic accounting. Vance frowned. Of course. Good, I said, because I have a document here that I think you should see before you file any lawsuits claiming family resources. I slid the paper across the table. It was a photocopy of a bank transfer record from 8 years ago. It shows a transfer of $50,000 from the trust of Elizabeth Graham, my grandmother, to the operating account of Hamilton and Pierce Media. I pointed to the signature line at the bottom. Darlene, I said, look at the signature. Darlene looked. She did not want to, but she could not help herself. That is my signature, she said defiantly. I was the trustee. I had the right to move funds. I shook my head. Read the date. Darlene, the transfer happened on May 22nd. I paused. Grandma's will stated that the trust was to be dissolved and the funds transferred to me, the beneficiary, upon my graduation. I graduated on May 15th. I leaned forward. On May 22nd, that money was legally mine. You were no longer the trustee. You were just a person with access to the account number. I looked at Vance. Mr. Vance, I am not a lawyer. but I believe in North Carolina. Moving $50,000 that does not belong to you across state lines to pay for a wedding vendor is called wire fraud. And since you forged my consent on the release form, which I also have a copy of it, is also identity theft." Vance went pale. He picked up the paper, his hands trembling. Do you have the original?" Vance asked. "I have everything." I said, "I have the bank logs. I have the affidavit from the bank manager who processed it. I have had it for 8 years. I looked at Darlene. I kept it as insurance." I said, "I knew one day you would try to take credit for what I built. I knew you would come back." Darlene was staring at the paper. She looked like she had been slapped. "You would send your own mother to prison," she whispered. I leaned back in my chair. "I do not want to send you to prison." "Darlene, that would be a waste of taxpayer money. And frankly, you would probably enjoy the attention." I closed my folder. "But here is the reality. You have zero leverage. You have no claim on my company. You have no claim on my money. And you certainly have no claim on me." Blair started to cry. It was a quiet, broken sound. "We are broke, Caroline," Blair sobbed. "We are going to lose the house. Grant has gambled everything away. Mom is trying to fix it, but she just keeps digging." I looked at my sister. For the first time, I felt a flicker of pity. Not enough to save her, but enough to pause. Darlene looked up. Her eyes were desperate now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrified realization that I held the gun. "Caroline," she pleaded, "please, we are family. The bank, they are going to take the building next week." I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. I thought about letting them drown. It would be easy. It would be poetic justice. But I was a strategist. And a strategist knows that sometimes a dead enemy is less useful than a controlled one. I turned back to them. "I will consider it," I said. Darlene's head snapped up. Hope, bright and pathetic, flooded her face. You will help us." I said. "I will consider a partnership," I corrected. "But let me be crystal clear." I walked back to the table and placed my hands on the cool glass surface. "It will not be a merger. It will not be a bailout. And it will definitely not be on your terms." I looked Darlene dead in the eye. "If I step in to save your company, I do it my way. And you are not going to like my conditions. In fact, you are going to hate them." Darlene nodded quickly. "Too quickly. Anything. We can discuss terms. Just do not let us go under." I checked my watch again. "I have a meeting with a real client in 5 minutes. Go back to Raleigh. Tell the bank you are in negotiations with Northline. That will buy you a week." I pressed the button on the intercom. "Reggie." "Yes." "Ms. Hamilton." Reggie's voice came through the speaker. "Please escort my visitors to the exit. They are leaving now." I looked at Darlene one last time. "Get out of my office. I will send the term sheet." Darlene stood up. She looked shaken, diminished, and terrified. But she was alive. She had a lifeline, even if it was made of razor wire. She grabbed her bag. "Come on, Blair." They walked out of the conference room. I watched them go. I watched them walk through the lobby, past the logo I had designed, past the employees I had hired. I sat back down in the leather chair. I looked at the photocopy of the bank transfer. I folded it carefully and put it back in the folder. The trap was set. Now, I just had to close the door. 48 hours after I evicted my mother from my lobby, we were back in the same glass-walled room, but the atmosphere had shifted. It was no longer a reunion. It was a deposition. This time, Darlene had brought Wade. My father sat at the far end of the table, looking smaller than I remembered. The last 8 years had not been kind to him. His hair had thinned to a wisp of gray, and the ruddy complexion of a man who spent his afternoons on the golf course had been replaced by the pallor of a man who spent his nights staring at unpaid invoices. He refused to look me in the eye. He kept his gaze fixed on the leather folio in front of him, his hands clasping and unclasping in a nervous rhythm. Darlene sat next to him, rigid and armored in a navy suit, her face set in a mask of grim determination. Blair was there too, sitting slightly apart from them, looking like she wanted to be anywhere else on earth, on my side of the table. I had Veronica, my lead counsel, and Marcus, my head of analytics. I did not need them for protection. I needed them for witness. I slid a thick document across the mahogany table. It landed with a heavy thud. "This is the term sheet," I said, my voice devoid of inflection. "It is non-negotiable." Darlene reached for it. Her hand trembled slightly, but she snatched the paper with a sense of entitlement that defied her circumstances. She opened it, scanning the first page. Mr. Vance, their gray-faced legal advisor, leaned over her shoulder, his eyes darting back and forth behind his bifocals. I watched them read. I knew exactly which line would make them stop. It took about 90 seconds. Darlene's head snapped up. Her face was flushed with sudden, sharp anger. "This is a joke," she spat. She shoved the document toward the center of the table. "Clause 4, she said, her voice rising. "Immediate removal of Wade Hamilton and Darlene Hamilton from all operational, financial, and strategic decision-making roles." She looked at me with incredulity. "You are kicking us out of our own company." I did not blink. "I am removing the variables that caused the failure." I corrected. "You asked me to save the ship. The first rule of salvage is to remove the captain who steered it into the iceberg." Wade finally looked up. His eyes were watery and resentful. "Now see here, Caroline," he blustered, finding a shred of his old patriarchal voice. "I built Hamilton and Pierce. My name is on the door. You cannot just come in here and strip me of my title. It is my legacy. It is your debt," I said. I signaled to Marcus. He projected a slide onto the wall screen. It showed a timeline of their financial decisions over the last 5 years. "You rejected the digital pivot in 2020, I recited. "You authorized a high-interest loan to cover a dividend payout to yourselves in 2021, despite posting a loss. You hired Grant Holloway as a consultant for $100,000 a year, and there is no record of him ever logging into the company server." I looked at Wade. "That is not a legacy. Dad, that is looting." Darlene slammed her hand on the table. "We did what we had to do to maintain the family's standing," she shouted. "And now you want to humiliate us. You want to strip us of our titles so you can parade around Charlotte as the winner. Is that it? Is this your little revenge fantasy?" I leaned forward, interlocking my fingers. "This has nothing to do with my feelings. Darlene, this is business." I pointed to the document. "My terms are standard for a distressed turnaround. Number 1, full financial transparency. Number 2, an independent audit dating back 10 years. Number 3, you two step down to honorary non-voting board roles. You keep a stipend, but you do not touch the steering wheel." I paused, letting the silence stretch. "You asked if I wanted to humiliate the family. No, I am preventing the family from humiliating me. If Northline partners with you, your reputation becomes my reputation, and I will not let your incompetence stain what I have built." Darlene looked ready to scream, but before she could, a quiet voice cut through the tension. Wait, it was Blair. She was reading the appendix of the document, the section where my team had outlined the questionable transactions identified during our 48-hour deep dive into their public filings and leaked vendor data. Blair looked up, her finger resting on a specific line item. "Mom," she said, her voice shaking, "what is this transfer from 2017? Darlene glanced at her, annoyed. "Not now." "Blair, we are discussing the leadership clause." "No, look at this," Blair insisted. She turned the page toward her mother. "It says here that $75,000 was withdrawn from the company capital account for event services, B. Hamilton. That was 3 months after my wedding." Blair looked at me, then back at Darlene. "You told me the wedding went over budget by $10,000. You said Dad covered it with his bonus." I watched Darlene's face. For a split second, there was a flicker of panic. "It was a reallocation," Darlene said dismissively. "Accounting tricks. You wouldn't understand." I did not let her off the hook. It was not a trick. "Blair," I said softly. I pulled a file from my stack. "Darlene took out a second loan against the business to pay for your honeymoon and the down payment on Grant's Porsche. They labeled it as a business expense to avoid taxes. That is why the IRS is currently auditing them. Blair stared at me. Her mouth fell open. You stole from the company to buy Grant a car. It was not stealing, Darlene snapped. It was keeping up appearances. Grant needed to look successful to get clients. We were helping him help us. But you told me he bought it, Blair cried out. You told me Grant was doing well. You let me believe we were safe. Blair's voice cracked. I have been living a lie. The wedding, the house, the car. It was all fake. It was all stolen money. First from Caroline, then from the company. Darlene turned on her daughter, her eyes blazing with a ferocity that was ugly to witness. Shut up, Darlene hissed. Her voice was low and venomous. Stop whining. I did everything for you. I made you who you are. If I hadn't spent that money, you would be nobody. You would be working a desk job like a commoner instead of being Mrs. Holloway. So shut your mouth and let me handle this. The room went dead silent. Blair recoiled as if she had been slapped. She looked at her mother, really looked at her, and I saw the light go out in her eyes. The adoration, the blind trust, the desperation to please it all evaporated, leaving only a cold, hollow realization. She slumped back in her chair. She did not say another word, but the silence she radiated was heavier than any scream. Darlene turned back to me, composing herself as if she hadn't just verbally eviscerated her favorite child. She smoothed her jacket. Anyway, she said, her voice tight, these terms are unacceptable. We will not agree to step down. It is our company. Mr. Vance cleared his throat. Ms. Hamilton, he said to me, trying to sound authoritative. While your offer is generous, we have other options. We can approach other investors. We can refinance. We do not have to accept a hostile takeover disguised as a partnership. I looked at Vance. Then I looked at Darlene. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. Actually, I said, you do not have other options. I opened the final folder on my side of the table. Twist number 1. I thought, you see, I said, I did not just look at your books. I called your creditors. Darlene froze. You did what Northline isn't just a strategy firm. I explained calmly. We have a mergers and acquisitions division. We specialize in distressed assets. I pulled out a letter printed on the stationery of First Citizens Bank. Yesterday afternoon, I had a conversation with the vice president of commercial lending at First Citizens. He was very interested to hear that Northline was looking at your portfolio. In fact, he was so relieved to find a solvent entity interested in your mess that he made me an offer. I slid the letter toward Vance. The bank has agreed to sell your debt to Northline Capital. Darlene's face went white, waxy, corpse-like white. What does that mean? She whispered. It means, I said, leaning back, that as of 9 o'clock this morning, when the wire transfer clears, I am not your potential partner. I paused for effect. I am your bank. I watched the realization hit them like a physical blow. Wade slumped forward, putting his head in his hands. Darlene looked like she was choking. You owe $2.4 million. I continued, my voice mercilessly precise. And you owe it to me. I own the note on your building. I own the lien on your printing presses. And because you personally guaranteed the loans, I own the mortgage on your house in Raleigh. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop. I could foreclose on you tomorrow. I said, I could seize the building, sell off the equipment, and evict you from your home. I have the legal right to strip you of everything you own to satisfy the debt. Darlene looked at me with horror. You wouldn't. We are your parents. I tilted my head. You told me to survive on my own. Didn't you? You told me that if I didn't support the family, I didn't deserve its protection. Well, the tables have turned. You are now existing entirely at my mercy. Blair was crying now. Soft, silent tears that ran down her perfect makeup. But they weren't tears of self-pity anymore. She was looking at me with something else. Shame. Caroline. Blair whispered, I didn't know. About the debt. About the bank. I swear. I looked at my sister. I know you didn't. I said, that is the tragedy of it. Blair, you were too busy looking in the mirror to look at the ledger. I turned back to Darlene. I am not going to foreclose. I said. Wade looked up, hope flaring in his eyes. I am not going to destroy you, I said, because unlike you, I do not get pleasure from watching family suffer. I tapped the term sheet on the table. But this document, it is no longer a negotiation, it is an ultimatum. You will sign over full operational control to Northline. You will resign from the board. You will accept the stipend I have allocated, which is enough to live comfortably, but not enough to buy Ferraris or throw galas. I looked at Darlene, and you will never, ever use my name to open a door again. Darlene stared at me. She was cornered. She was trapped in a cage of her own making, and I held the key. She looked at the document, then at Vance, who gave a small, defeated nod. She picked up the pen. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She looked at me one last time, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and grudging awe. You have become cold. Caroline, she said, I learned from the best. I replied. She signed. Wade signed. It was done. The company they had used to justify their neglect of me was now mine. Darlene stood up. She looked 10 years older than she had when she walked in. She gathered her bag, her movements slow and stiff. She walked to the door, then stopped. She turned back to me. She wanted the last word. She needed to draw blood one last time. You think you have won, she said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. But you will be lonely, Caroline. Success is cold at the top. You will regret this. You will regret treating your mother like an employee. I looked at her. I felt nothing. No pain, no anger, just a profound sense of closure. I have already regretted it. Darlene, I said quietly. She raised an eyebrow, thinking she had found a crack. I regret that I spent 20 years thinking you would change. I said, I regret that I waited this long to realize that you are not a mother. You are just a bad investment. I turned my chair away from them, facing the window and the city I had conquered. Security will see you out. I heard the door click shut. I sat there for a long time, watching the clouds move over Charlotte. I was the owner of a failing media empire. I was the holder of my parents' debt. I was the most powerful person in the room. And for the first time in my life, the silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. Signing a piece of paper does not stop a war. It just changes the weapons. When Darlene and Wade walked out of my conference room, stripped of their titles and shackled to my terms, I expected silence. I expected them to retreat to Raleigh and lick their wounds. I underestimated the sheer kinetic energy of Darlene's narcissism. When you take away a narcissist's power, they do not reflect, they detonate. The fallout began 48 hours after the meeting. It started with the emails. Not to me, my filters were too strong for that, but to my staff. Darlene had somehow retained an old contact list, or perhaps she had spent the night scouring LinkedIn. My director of operations, a no-nonsense woman named Sarah, walked into my office on Friday morning with a tablet in her hand. She looked uncomfortable. Boss, we need to talk about the spam filters. Sarah said. I looked up from the acquisition strategy I was drafting. What is it? Sarah hesitated, then handed me the tablet. It was an email sent to 15 of my senior staff members. The subject line was, A Mother's Plea. I felt a cold spike of nausea in my stomach. I read the text. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. It painted Darlene as a confused, elderly woman who had been ruthlessly strong-armed by an estranged daughter she only wanted to love. It hinted that Northline's success was built on stolen family intellectual property, and that my recent acquisition of their debt was an act of vengeful cruelty. It was vague enough to avoid libel laws, but specific enough to plant a seed of doubt. I handed the tablet back to Sarah. My hand was steady. Ignore it, I said. Sarah frowned. Caroline, she is saying you stole from them. People are talking in the break room. Let them talk, I said. Turning back to my monitor. Send a memo to HR. Any external communication regarding the Hamilton and Pierce acquisition is to be flagged as a phishing attempt. If she emails again, block the domain. If she calls, hang up. We do not engage with terrorists. Sarah, even emotional ones. Sarah nodded slowly. Understood. But Darlene did not stop at emails. She started working the phones. She called old family friends in Charlotte, people who knew people on my board. She tried to ignite a whisper campaign in the local business journal. She wanted to paint me as the villain of the story, the cold, heartless corporate raider crushing her poor, aging parents. I did not fight back with words. I fought back with silence. I let my reputation as a fortress do the work. My team knew who paid their mortgages. My clients knew who delivered their growth charts. Darlene was throwing pebbles at a tank. Then, the ammunition changed. On Tuesday of the following week, a courier envelope arrived at the front desk. It was marked "Personal and Confidential for C. Hamilton." There was no return address. I opened it in my office with the blinds drawn. Inside was a stack of photocopied ledgers and a handwritten note. The handwriting was shaky, belonging to someone old and frightened. Ms. Hamilton. I was the chief financial officer for Hamilton and Pierce from 2010 until I was fired last year. Your father told me to adjust the valuation of the printing assets to secure the loan from First Citizens. I refused. He fired me and did it himself. I kept copies. I do not want to go to jail when this ship sinks. Arthur Penn. I stared at the documents. I flipped through the pages. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was all there. Inventory inflation, phantom accounts receivable, depreciation schedules that had been magically altered to make old. Rusting machines look like new assets. Wade had not just made bad business decisions. He had committed bank fraud. He had lied to the bank to get the $2 million loan. The same loan I had just bought. I sat back in my chair. This was not just leverage. This was a nuclear code. If I handed this to the district attorney, Wade would not just lose his house. He would spend the rest of his life in a federal facility. I picked up the phone to call Veronica. My finger hovered over the dial button. I could end it right now. I could destroy him. But I put the phone down. No. If I sent Wade to prison, the scandal would splash onto Northline. CEO's father arrested for fraud. It would dominate the news cycle. It would taint the acquisition. I needed the assets of Hamilton and Pierce to be clean so I could liquidate them or restructure them. I did not need a crime scene. I put the documents in my safe. I am not going to use this to destroy you. Wade, I whispered to the empty room. I am going to use this to own you. 2 days later, my personal cell phone buzzed. It was a number I did not recognize. I answered, "This is Hamilton, Caroline." The voice was small, cracked, and terrified. It was Blair. "What do you want?" "Blair," I asked, my voice guarding against another ambush. "I need to see you," she said. "Not at the office. Please, Mom does not know I am calling." I paused. I listened to the background noise on her end. Traffic, wind. She was outside, away from the suffocating influence of Darlene. "Meet me at Freedom Park," I said. "The stone bridge. 1 hour." I went alone. I wore sunglasses and a trench coat, looking more like a spy than a sister. Blair was already there, leaning against the stone railing, looking down at the duck pond. She looked terrible. The polished, perfect Hamilton princess was gone. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was wearing no makeup. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. I walked up beside her. I did not hug her. "You have 10 minutes, I said. Blair turned to look at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "I left him," she said. I waited. "Grant?" she clarified. "I packed my bags this morning." I told him I was done being a prop in his life. He screamed at me. He told me I was nothing without him. She let out a bitter laugh. He sounded exactly like Mom. I watched a duck paddle through the murky water. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I want to know if it is too late." Blair said. She turned to face me fully. "Caroline, I looked at the papers you showed us. The wedding money, the car. I really did not know. I mean, I knew we were superficial. I knew we liked nice things, but I did not know we were thieves." She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "I do not want to be them. Caroline, I am 34 years old, and I have never paid a bill with money I actually earned. I feel sick all the time." I looked at her. I saw the sincerity there, It was fragile, but it was real. I can help you, I said, but not with money. Blair nodded. I do not want your money. I want the truth. I said. I turned to face her. I am initiating a forensic audit of Hamilton and Pierce starting Monday. My team is going to tear that place apart. They are going to find the fraud. They are going to find the lies. I stepped closer. Darlene is going to try to hide it. She is going to try to shred documents. She is going to try to blame the employees. I need a witness inside. Blair, I need someone who can tell the auditors where to look. I need someone who will go on record stating that Darlene and Wade had sole control of those accounts. Blair's eyes widened. You want me to testify against Mom and Dad? I want you to choose. I said hard. You can continue to be their puppet, protecting their lies until the law comes for all of you. Or you can step across the line. You can help me clean up the mess. I looked at her intense and unblinking. If you help me, I will ensure you are protected from the liability. I will help you find a job, a real job, entry level, where you can learn to work. But if you lie for them, Blair, if you cover for them, then you go down with the ship. Blair looked down at her hands. She was trembling. It was the hardest decision of her life. She was breaking the programming of 3 decades. She looked up. Mom is hiding the secondary ledger in the safe at the lake house. Blair whispered. I felt a surge of validation. She moves it every weekend. Blair continued, her voice gaining strength, and she has been deleting emails all week. She thinks if she deletes them, they are gone forever. I nodded. She is wrong. My tech team can recover anything. Blair took a deep breath. I will talk to your auditors. I will tell them everything. Good, I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a business card for my HR director. Call this number tomorrow. We have an opening for an administrative assistant in the data entry department. It pays $18 an hour. It is boring work. You will be invisible. Blair took the card. She looked at it like it was a winning lottery ticket. $18 an hour. She repeated, That sounds perfect. Go, I said, before she realizes you are gone. The next week was a blur of destruction. My forensic team descended on the Hamilton and Pierce offices in Raleigh like a swarm of locusts. With the information from Arthur Penn and the guidance from Blair, they dismantled the company's defenses in 48 hours. The findings were catastrophic. We found the inflated assets. We found the personal expenses buried in marketing budgets. We found that Wade had been paying himself a bonus while laying off staff. As the audit progressed, the smell of death surrounded the company. Vendors who caught wind of the investigation stopped shipping paper and ink. Key clients, realizing the ship was sinking, exercised their termination clauses. The revenue stream did not just dry up, it evaporated. Darlene tried to hold the line. She showed up at the Raleigh office every day, screaming at my auditors, threatening lawsuits, trying to physically block them from the file rooms. But then I played my card. I had Veronica send a draft of the fraud complaint to Darlene's personal lawyer. We did not file it with the court. We just let them see it. We let them see the evidence from Arthur Penn. We let them see that we knew about the federal crimes. The screaming stopped. The resistance collapsed. On Friday afternoon, 10 days before the final deadline, Darlene came back to Charlotte. She did not bring an entourage. She did not bring Wade. She did not bring a lawyer. She walked into the Northline lobby alone. I was watching from the security feed in my office. She looked small. Her suit was wrinkled. Her hair was not perfectly sprayed. She walked with a slight limp, the swagger of the Hamilton matriarch completely gone. She approached the desk. Reggie was there. Darlene did not point. She did not shout. She stood quietly, clutching her purse. "Excuse me, sir," I heard her say, through the audio feed. Her voice was thin. Reggie looked down at her. "Yes, ma'am, is Ms. Hamilton available?" Darlene asked. "I do not have an appointment, but please tell her mother is here, and I will wait as long as it takes." Reggie looked at the camera. He knew I was watching. I pressed the button on my desk phone. "Send her up. Reggie." When Darlene walked into my office, she did not look at the view. She did not look at the furniture. She looked at the floor. She sat in the chair opposite my desk. She looked like a prisoner waiting for sentencing. We received the file. Darlene said quietly, "The fraud complaint." I nodded. "I assumed you would. Are you going to send Wade to prison?" she asked. Her voice broke. "He is an old man." "Caroline, he won't survive it. That depends on you," I said. Darlene looked up. Her eyes were red. "We have nothing left. Caroline, the bank accounts are frozen. The clients are gone. Blair won't answer my calls." She moved out. She looked at me with a desperation that was painful to watch. "You have won. You have taken everything. What more do you want?" I leaned forward. "I do not want your suffering." "Darlene, I never did. I just wanted you to stop lying." I picked up a file from my desk. "This is the final agreement. It is the closing document for the acquisition." I opened it. "We are holding a final board meeting on Monday morning to ratify the transfer of assets. You and Wade will sign over 100% of the equity in Hamilton and Pierce to Northline. In exchange, I will absorb the debt. I will seal the fraud evidence. Wade stays out of prison. You keep the house, but it will be in my name. You will live there as tenants." Darlene flinched at the word tenants, and in return she asked, "In return?" I said, "You disappear. You retire. You never speak to the press again. You never claim to be a victim. You fade away." Darlene stared at me. She saw the absolute resolution in my face. She realized that the daughter she had thrown away was the only thing standing between her and a concrete cell. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." She stood up to leave. She paused at the door. She looked back at me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the old Darlene, the woman who wanted to be adored. "Did you ever love us?" she asked. I looked at her. I thought about the little girl who used to wait by the window for her car to come home. "I did." I said. "That was my mistake." Darlene looked down, defeated. She walked out. I turned my chair to the window. The countdown had begun. Monday morning. The final signature. I had the king. I had the queen. I had the board. I looked at the city of Charlotte, glowing in the twilight. One more move, and then the game was over. Monday morning dawned with a sky the color of bruised slate. It was raining in Charlotte, a relentless gray drizzle that washed the dust off the skyscrapers. Inside the boardroom of Northline Strategy Group, however, the air was bone dry. This was it, the final reckoning. The table was set for the last act of a tragedy that had been writing itself for 30 years. On one side sat my legal team, headed by Veronica, and my financial analysts. On the other side sat the remnants of the Hamilton dynasty, Darlene, Wade, and their gray-faced lawyer, Mr. Vance. Blair sat at the far end of the table, separated from them by 3 empty chairs. The mood was not hostile. It was funeral. We had spent the weekend finalizing the forensic audit. The results were conclusive. Hamilton and Pierce Media was not just a failing company. It was a corpse that Darlene and Wade had been trying to animate with fraud and delusion. They were insolvent. They had missed payroll for 3 weeks. Their landlord in Raleigh had already served an eviction notice. Darlene looked haggard. She was wearing the same suit she had worn on Thursday, but it looked slept in. Her hands were gripping a coffee cup, as if it were the only warm thing left in her world. "Caroline," Darlene started, her voice raspy. "Please, before we sign anything, can we just discuss the legacy clause again?" I looked up from the contract. "There is no legacy clause." "Darlene," I said, "just the name." She pleaded. "A small subsidiary, maybe Hamilton Creative. Something to keep the name alive. For your father. We built that brand for 40 years. If you erase it, you erase us." I looked at Wade. He was staring at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. "The name is toxic," I said flatly. "I am not buying a brand. I am buying assets." I signaled to Marcus, who projected the restructuring plan onto the wall. "Here's the reality," I continued. "I am acquiring the client list, the proprietary software, and the physical equipment. I am taking on the 64 employees who haven't been paid in a month. I am covering their back wages out of my own pocket because, unlike you, I do not believe in slave labor." I pointed to the screen. "But the entity known as Hamilton and Pierce is dissolving. Today, It ceases to exist at noon. The new division will be folded into Northline under a new name, Northline Digital. Darlene slammed her cup down. Coffee sloshed onto the polished mahogany. You cannot do this, she shouted, her desperation spiking into rage. You are stripping us naked. We are your parents. You are doing this to punish us. I stood up. No, I said. My voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. I am not punishing you. Punishment requires emotion. Punishment requires anger. This is not anger. Darlene, this is sanitation. I walked to the window, looking out at the rain-slicked streets. I am ending the cycle. I said, I am stopping the lie before it eats another generation. Wade finally spoke. He cleared his throat, a wet, rattling sound. He stood up slowly, looking every day of his 65 years. Caroline, he said. I turned to look at him. He looked at me with eyes that were watery and red. For a moment, I saw the father who used to push me on the swing set, before the money became tight, before the pretension took over. I am sorry, Wade said. His voice trembled. The room went silent. Darlene looked at him, shocked. Blair looked up, hopeful. I am sorry we were hard on you, he continued. I see that now. You have done incredible things. You are a brilliant businesswoman, better than I ever was. I felt a strange tightness in my chest, a dangerous little flare of hope. Was this it? Was this the moment of clarity? But then, he kept talking. So please, Wade said, leaning forward, a wheedling tone entering his voice. Since you are so successful, surely you can structure this so we keep a consulting fee, just $5,000 a month, for the family. You have so much. Caroline, help your old man this one time. We just need a little cushion. The tightness in my chest vanished instantly. It was replaced by a hollow, ringing clarity. He was not sorry for hurting me. He was sorry he had bet on the wrong horse. He was apologizing to the bank manager, not his daughter. I looked at him, and I felt the final tether snap. Sit down. Wade, I said coldly. He blinked. But sit down. I commanded. I walked back to the head of the table. There will be no consulting fees. There will be no cushion. I turned to Mr. Vance. Tell them the rest. Vance looked pale. He adjusted his glasses. Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Ms. Hamilton, that is. The CEO of Northline has already purchased the primary debt instrument from First Citizens Bank. The transfer cleared this morning. Darlene gasped. She looked at me, horror dawning on her face. You own the debt, she whispered. I nodded. I own it all. Which means I do not need your permission to sell the company. I do not need your signature to dissolve the brand. I am not negotiating with you. I am informing you. I placed the final document in front of them. You have two choices. Option A. You sign this release. You walk away with no debt, no lawsuits, and you keep the house which I will own, but you can live in. Option B. I foreclose on everything by 5 o'clock today. The house goes, the cars go, and I hand the evidence of the bank fraud to the federal prosecutor. Darlene looked at me. She looked at the paper. She looked at the trap that had snapped shut around her leg. You are a monster, she hissed. I am a strategist. I corrected. And I just checkmated you. Sign the papers. Darlene picked up the pen. She was crying now. Ugly, angry tears. She signed her name with a vicious scratch. Wade signed next, his hand shaking so badly the letters were illegible. It was done. The legacy was dead. Then, there was movement at the end of the table. Blair stood up. She walked over to me. She was holding a piece of paper she had written on legal pad. She placed it on the table in front of me. What is this? I asked. It is a promissory note, Blair said. Her voice was steady. I picked it up. It was a handwritten contract. Blair Hamilton promised to repay Northline Strategy Group the sum of $85,000. The estimated cost of the wedding and the car in monthly installments of $500. I looked at her. You do not have to do this. Blair, I said, you have the job in data entry. That is enough. No, it is not, Blair said. She looked at Darlene, then back at me. I do not want to be like them. Caroline, I want to be clean. I want to know that the food I eat and the roof over my head are mine. Even if it takes me 20 years to pay this back, I need to do it. I looked at the note. I looked at my sister. For the first time in 8 years, I saw a Hamilton who had a spine. I picked up my pen. I signed the bottom of her note, witnessing it. Accepted. I said. I handed it back to her. Welcome to the real world. Blair. Darlene stood up. She gathered her purse. She looked at Blair with pure disdain. You are a fool. Blair. Darlene spat. You are siding with the enemy. Blair looked at our mother. She is not the enemy. Mom. She is the only one who told us the truth. Darlene scoffed. She turned to me for one last strike. You talk about ending cycles. Caroline, but look at you. You are sitting alone at the head of a table. You have cut out your own blood. Blood is supposed to be sacred. I stood up. I closed the heavy leather folder containing the deed to their company. I looked Darlene right in the eye. Blood is biology. Darlene, it is not a suicide pact, and it is certainly not a license to destroy people. I pressed the intercom button. Reggie. Yes, Ms. Hamilton. We are finished here. Please escort Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton to the exit. I walked them out to the lobby. The glass doors of the conference room slid open. The hum of the office filled the earphones ringing. Keyboards clacking. The sound of a company that was alive and growing. We reached the security desk. Reggie stepped out. He looked at Darlene. He did not smile. He did not frown. He just pointed toward the revolving doors. Darlene stopped. She looked around the lobby one last time. She looked at the logo on the wall. She looked at the busy employees. She looked at me. She opened her mouth to say something, perhaps a curse, perhaps a plea, but Reggie cut her off. Mrs. Hamilton, he said, his voice deep and final. Please leave the building. You are blocking the flow of business. Darlene flinched. She looked at Wade. Wade looked at the floor. They turned and walked away. I watched them go. I watched them push through the revolving doors and step out into the gray. Pouring rain. They looked small. They looked ordinary. They were just two people who had forgotten that respect is something you earn, not something you inherit. Blair stood beside me. Are you okay? She asked. I took a deep breath. The air in the lobby smelled of rain and coffee and ozone. It smelled clean. I looked up at the steel letters on the wall, Northline Strategy Group. I thought about the girl who sat on a bus with $400 in a duffel bag. I thought about the waitress who poured coffee at dawn. I thought about the woman who ate peanut butter for dinner so she could pay a designer. I looked at Blair. I am better than okay, I said. I looked through the glass doors at the retreating figures of my parents, disappearing into the mist of the city. You taught me to self-preserve. Mother, I whispered, though she could no longer hear me. I turned my back on the doors and looked at my company. You taught me to take care of myself. So today, I am taking care of not letting you into my life anymore. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from. Are you listening while driving, working, or just relaxing at home? Please let me know in the comments below. And do not forget to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this journey with even more people.